Shauna Moran is an award-winning women's leadership coach, burnout prevention specialist, international keynote speaker, published author, and breathwork facilitator. In a world where leadership and well-being are essential, Shauna stands out by delivering science-backed strategies and deeply human insight that go beyond surface-level solutions. A sought-after speaker, she empowers leaders and organizations to build resilient, high-performing cultures where people and profits thrive. Shauna inspires lasting transformation through practical tools, compelling stories, and a powerful mission to advance women's leadership and prevent burnout in today's demanding professional landscape. And today we're going to talk about both those things, burnout and women's leadership. Shauna, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Mike. It's great to be here.
So my first question, as always, is, Shauna, from all of your experience, what do you believe is the one most important characteristic of a great leadership team?
Great question. And for many people comment on that because it really gets you thinking. And I'm between two things. Number one, an openness. Are we open as a leadership team to trying new things, to hearing alternative perspectives? Are we open to suspending our own judgments, our own ego, so that we can manage change, uncertainty, all of those things? So I think openness is really key on a leadership team. How do we get to a place where we're continually open and we're not just stuck in the old ways of doing things or in the old thinking? And, oftentimes when we're introducing new thinking, resistance can come up. So what are we doing to remain open as a leadership team? So I think that's number one. And the second thing I think is really important if we want to be open is respect. How do we show up with respect for each other as we challenge the hard things and talk about the hard things? We need that undercurrent and that foundation of respect.
Yeah, and I'm going to allow you cheating and answering two things because they're related to each other. So, Shauna, I'm going to allow it, although you tried to cheat from the first question. No, but I love that. And what I've seen, interested in your experience with this, with the openness and the respect, more than anything, I have seen that needs to be modeled from the very top, from the CEO. If the CEO is not open to new ideas, if they shut people down, if they're not curious about other people's ideas, if they don't show respect for other people's ideas, that tends to cascade down through the rest of the team.
Absolutely, it does.
So, Shauna, why did you decide we're going to focus on burnout and women's leadership? And I'm sure there's some tie between the two, or maybe you'll tell me there's not. But why did you decide in your practice, in your business, why did you decide to focus on those topics in particular?
In a way, Mike, it wasn't really a decision. It was more of a calling, as cliche as that may sound. My life path is often about having big experiences and being able to turn those experiences and often that pain into wisdom and to share that and to be able to show up for others in those ways. So it started with my own story, being a female leader in a corporate environment over the years and working my way up. I thought that, that there was really something wrong with me when I had burned out 3 times by the age of 28. So I had my own experiences, my own challenges with that. I burnt out. What I realized from my research is for many different reasons. Every single time I burnt out, it was because of a different root cause. And when I left my corporate job, I started my own business. I was consulting primarily for agencies and tech companies. I used to work with Shopify, so that's where my background is in tech and e-commerce and business strategy. And quite quickly, I realized in those advisory and consultancy services that, it's not just me that experienced that burnout. Actually, stress and workplace stress is a common problem I'm seeing amongst all leadership teams and all organizations. And what I really found was that nobody was actually solving the problem. It was all surface level solutions that were focused on the individual and leaving out that systemic lens of what do we need to do as an organization to ensure that our systems, our processes, our culture, and our skills support sustainable well-being as we grow? So my curious mind led me down the path of research, and I ended up writing a book in 2021 called Managing Employee Burnout: How to Retain and Engage Teams Without Stress. And through that research, Mike, I found out that it was women in the workplace, that women in leadership positions in particular, that were the highest demographic to experience workplace burnout. And I mean, I could see that in my work as well, but to actually see the data on that, and thankfully now we actually have a lot more data on that. And, we know that 1 in 3 women in leadership positions consider leaving their role due to workplace stress. We know that McKinsey found in 2021, 52% of female leaders have experienced or report feeling burnt out in their role. So the women's work was a result of that research. And I became really passionate about, I'm always passionate about, getting women into leadership positions. It's so important, but how do we get them to actually thrive, not just survive in those leadership positions? And that's where my work comes in with women leaders.
I definitely want to come back to your thoughts on why women experience it more often. That's, obviously curious about that. But before I ask you that question, I want to rewind a little bit in talking about burnout. How do you define burnout, and how do we know if we or someone is burnt out or just tired or just frustrated? How do you define it?
Yeah. Well, really, when we're talking about burnout, we're talking about, a chronic state of stress that's going on for a long time. So we're not going to get burnt out after a busy week, a busy month, not even after a busy quarter. But if we are exposed to those chronic stressors on the job over and over and over and over again, where we're not able to regulate our system and actually manage that stress effectively, that's where we can start to fall into what's known as burnout. There's actually 5 stages to burnout. So, there's, the optimism phase where we're feeling very optimistic and we can manage the stress. And again, if the chronic stress or whatever is causing the stress, and it could be a couple of different things, if they don't change or improve, we start to move down into different stages of burnout where we may feel things like more anxiety, sleep issues, more less of an optimistic mindset. Social withdrawal can be a big thing. But the thing is, Mike, everybody experiences and shows stress in different ways, right? For some of us, it's very emotional. For some of us, it's physical. For some of us, it's more cognitive. We struggle to make decisions. So we're all so different. And I think that the big thing is, we're going to be exposed to stress. That's the world that we live in. And not all stress is bad stress. We talk about healthy stress and unhealthy stress. Healthy stress is that big ambitious goal. Let's go. We're pumped. We're excited about it. If we reduce stress too much, we're going to get bored. We call it bore out, right? So we have to find that optimal zone as an organization, as leaders, as a leadership team, within our team. What is that optimal zone where we have the right amount of stress, the good stress, the things we actually want to go after, not the unhealthy stress, like, the lack of clarity, right? Because that's a source of chronic stress if we have a lack of role clarity and responsibilities. But the good stress and the stress that keeps us at our peak, but also, oftentimes we're in that optimal state, we can move into that fatigue state. So you mentioned, like, what if we're tired? Okay, we're tired. We know that. It's been a busy month. We've achieved a lot of things. What do we need to do to regulate so that we're not staying at that level of fatigue? So it's a mastery of self, really, when it comes to managing stress in high-performing environments. And it's really about that self-awareness. I mean, I'm doing this work for years, and I can hand on my heart say, I'm not perfect either. I am constantly checking in with myself, constantly looking at, okay, where have I been? Where have my stress levels been? Where am I on that zone? And what do I need to be able to manage that stress? So it's a constant conversation with yourself, first and foremost.
Why do you believe it impacts female leaders more than male leaders?
So there's a couple of different reasons, and I'm not saying male leaders don't feel stressed. We know that in general, burnout is on the rise across all demographics in the workplace. But for female leaders, there's unique challenges that female leaders face. We know things like, the general bias or microaggressions in the workplace, the challenges that women have in terms of pay, in terms of promotions, in terms of visibility within the workplace. We know that women are more likely to take on DEI initiatives and initiatives for their team in terms of coaching and mentorship. So often there's a higher mental load for women in a couple of different regards. And also, our workplaces were built, on a 9 to 5, oftentimes industrial revolution, style way of working that was created back then. And, for a lot of women and the way that women are, whether it's families or home or all of these extra responsibilities, and also the way that women are biologically set up, right? You have things like our biological systems, our cycles that we work off, our energy peaks and dips at different stages of the month. We have things like perimenopause, menopause. So biologically, we're different. We have different needs. And it's not to say, we have to completely change our workplaces, to cater to that, but we need to be aware of that. And women, primarily, how can they be aware of those needs? And how can we create some male allyship around what it means to create equitable workplaces for women? So they're just some of the reasons. But, you have things like skills, and I see this a lot with the women that I work with, Mike. Confidence, executive presence, these are all things that can be more challenging for women, right? Like we know that there's a lot of research that shows that, even if men meet 80% of the job criteria or 70% of the job criteria, they'll apply for the role, versus a woman will no, I'm not going to apply until I meet 100%, right? So there's often a lot, there's a difference in mindset and how we approach, and skills like being able to advocate for ourselves, being able to negotiate, being able to master our executive presence, to really own our influence in a way that's authentic. These are the things that I'm supporting women with day in, day out, so that they can feel better in their leadership, that they feel better to set those healthy boundaries, to advocate for what they need. And oftentimes, I'm working with high performers. I'm always working with high performers, and high performers are actually the most likely to experience workplace burnout, yet they hide it so well, which I'm sure you've probably seen in your work, Mike. They hide it really, really well because they just keep on high performing, and nobody really knows that they're going through a challenge, right? Or that they need something else. So it's often the case I'm working with women leaders and high performers as well.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because one of the things I do with my clients is help them assess the performance. I work with CEOs and leadership teams, and I help them assess the performance of folks a level down, their direct reports. And I help the CEO assess the performance of folks on the leadership team. And it's absolutely true that some of the recommended actions for the highest performers are challenge them and increase their responsibility and raise the bar on their productivity measures, because they're, and I like your term bore out instead of burnout. I've seen more superstars leave out of boredom in places than anything else. But that's a tough balancing act, is when do you give your high performance more? When do you give your high performers more? There's a saying, if you want anything done, find the busiest person and ask them to do it. But, as leaders, how do we manage that fine line between, well, yeah, our highest performers want to be challenged, but how do we know when we're giving them too much and kind of tipping them over that from the healthy stress to the unhealthy stress?
Yeah. And I love that question. And it's, what are we challenging them with first and foremost is most important. So I talk a lot about the zone of genius, and really what is it that we do that brings the highest level of satisfaction to us personally, but also the highest ROI to the business, to the team, to the department. And that really is what that zone of genius is. And over the years, as we grow as leaders, and we develop and we get promoted and we have more experience, our zone of genius may change, right? And I often see this with the female leaders I work with, is that they got to a certain point in their leadership because they used to do it all and do it all really well. They were the master executor, and that's what got them to where they are. But at a certain point of leadership, it's not about doing. It's about being that visionary. It's about being that strategy. It's about being that systems operator with your team and delegating effectively and coaching people up and creating other leaders. And there's an identity shift that comes with that too, and that can bring up quite a lot for leaders. But the zone of genius will change then. Well, what really is going to bring you satisfaction at this stage? And that's the question that we need to ask. I worked with a VP recently who was in Burnout and, had done so much over her career, so much amazing impact. And she said to me, I don't know where my excitement's gone. Super high performing leader. And again, we worked on that zone of genius. We looked at, what is it that really lit her up, that got her to that optimal state of stress? And what was it that completely drained her? Things that maybe she was known as an expert for, but didn't bring her any satisfaction, which is often the case for high performers. They'll keep doing those tasks because they're known for that and they're known for getting it done, but they don't actually like it and it completely drains them. So we identified that. And then we identified, okay, what does your team look like now? If you're showing up in your zone of genius 80, 90, 100% of the time, what does your team structure look like? So we completely revamped her team structure. And, in 2 sessions, she came back to me and she said, Shauna, I feel more excited and alive in my work than I have done in years. And, that's really, I suppose, what high performers need. They need opportunities to step back and to revisit who they are now. What do they really want? What lights them up? Because high performers are doing all the time. I know because I am one. So to have the space in a coaching, mentorship and, space like that, to actually reflect on what do I really want at this stage is absolutely key.
So if we are within someone's zone of genius, if we are within what, people have natural strengths at, what they love to do, what adds value to the organization, there's going to be, if I'm hearing it right, there's less of a risk in burning someone out there. Now, of course, you can still overload someone with too much work, but there's less of a risk in burning ourselves out or others out if we're busy and in our zone of genius.
Yeah, it's the good busy. It's the meaningful work. Meaningful work is so important. Are you getting out of bed in the morning excited about your day ahead? In general, okay, it's not to say every day is perfect. There's going to be stress. There's going to be challenge within that. There's going to be friction. But in general, are you connected to your values and to your purpose? And that's really the conversations that we need to be having with our high performers. What is it that lights them up the most? And if they can't do that the majority of the time, what's the plan to get them there? And really honing in for leaders and conversations with what's the work that's draining you the most? And how do we create an ambitious goal around that if you're still doing that, right? Maybe it's you need to get your team or your department to a certain level and then we can hire another resource and then they can take that work that drains you and you can focus more on your zone of genius. Give a high performer that goal and they'll smash through it. But it's actually having those conversations and then they can see that path ahead. Then they can see this job, this company, this role. I can see my growth path ahead, and that's going to fuel them.
As a leader, my brain is fighting between two perspectives. As a leader, dealing with your own, how do you prevent your own burnout and deal with burnout if you're living it? Or your people. And I guess what I'm going to focus on, and maybe we could find a way to cover both, but as a leader, if I've got a team of 7 people working for me, what are some signs that I ought to be looking for to make sure I'm not burning someone out on my team? Or, because where I want to go is what are the signs to look for if someone is struggling in that way? And then as a leader, what do I do about it? And certainly you want to prevent it before it gets there. But as a leader, what are some signs I ought to be looking for in members of my team to know if they are approaching or already in burnout?
Yeah, great question. So at the start, I mentioned that everyone shows and demonstrates unhealthy stress in a different way. So, the first thing is you want to know your team, who they are when they are, their normal selves, when they're feeling normal and well. Who are they? How do they show up? And anything that kind of changes from that, right? So if you have someone that's quite optimistic or is very social with the team, right? They're in meetings, they share ideas, they share some suggestions, they crack a few jokes. And then all of a sudden you notice this person is actually turning their video camera off, or they're not as engaged, they're not sharing ideas, and they're saying, "What did you do for the weekend?" "I slept all weekend." Right? Those are indicators that there's something going on. Now, it might not necessarily be what you think. We can't make assumptions in this, right? People's lives, you just don't know what's going on, but it does mean that it's good to have a conversation, right? And this is why the investment in trust, the investment in giving your team time is really important. So one-to-ones sounds so basic, it sounds so simple, but it's so effective. If you're not having regular one-to-ones, you're not building that trust, and you're not checking in on those potential red flags or amber flags and actually saying, "Hey, I noticed, Mike, last week on our 2 team meetings, you didn't participate as you usually did. What's going on?" So being able to have those conversations openly in a safe environment is really, really key. And, I talk about one-to-ones. That's a root cause of unhealthy stress, Mike. If there's a lack of quality support from leaders, that is going to be an unhealthy stressor. So by having your one-to-ones, you're doing a number of things. You're building trust, but you're also giving that quality support on a regular basis, which is going to reduce the stress. And the other thing I'll add in here is lack of role clarity, which is a big one for teams right now that are navigating a lot of change, a lot of uncertainty. Things are changing all the time. And I mean, it's hard for leaders to even feel clear, let's be honest. How do we provide clarity in ambiguous environments? And that's often done in a one-to-one as well. And so that's why that time is so important. So I think sign-wise, looking at anything around disengagement, around changes in personality, in levels of optimism, in levels of social interaction, that's all key to look out for. And then what can you do about it? So, aside from the things I've mentioned, number one is have the conversation. Have the conversation and say, if you've noticed something, your intuition is so important as well as a leader. If you're feeling something, I had a team member once and it was just a real felt sense. She's a high performer. She was doing her work, but there was something missing in the way that she communicated, in the way that she was showing up to calls. Couldn't quite put my finger on it. And in our one-to-one, I just said, "Hey, I noticed X, Y, and Z, what's going on?" And it was in relation to some health challenges that she was having, right? Nothing that we were doing as a team or I wasn't doing as a leader. But I'm so happy I asked that question, right? Because if I didn't, I could start making stories up, assumptions, and then we just don't want that team environment. So let's connect adult to adult and actually, have those conversations, I think is key. But then thinking about what are we doing as a team, across role clarity, across support, across things like workloads and timelines. And this could nearly be a whole podcast episode in itself. But, when we look at things like unmanageable workloads or unrealistic timelines, research is like, well, these are sources of chronic stress. If we continue to face this as a team, as individuals, as leaders, we're going to experience that burnout. But, we're working at very fast pace where we have those ambitious goals. So it's not about, creating huge realistic timelines with lots of space or doing bare minimum work, but it's about working smarter, not harder. So looking at what are the things we need to let go of if we want to achieve this big timeline and this big goal, right? And, what are the things we're going to floor? What are the things we're going to focus on? What are we as a team going to do to make sure that we're creating these timelines realistically together? So yes, they're ambitious, but we have the time for the retrospective that's needed, or, the wind down before we start that next project. Or we are having regular conversations about reprioritization so that we're getting the work done, we're achieving those goals, but we're somewhat grounded in capacity, in what's actually possible, right? And I think that's that balance when we're a high performing organization that we're really working on. It's not about not creating big goals, but it's making sure that we identify and we remove the fluff and that we get the whole team focused and that we're creating rhythms to the team that are needed. So for example, like every quarter, I do, and my team, we do a Friday at the end of every quarter where we just shut down for the day, right? Like I'll go, my team are remote, they're all over the place, but I'll go do something for myself, they'll do something for and we just completely switch off as a way to just decompress, relax, reflect, and come back. So what are those rhythms as a team that support you in being high performing? Because it's not just a case about doing more and more and more and more. That doesn't work. We know that doesn't work. It's what's our strategy so that we can ultimately do the best and go after our goals and feel at our best while doing it. Because how we feel directly ties to what we do and how we do it and how effective we are.
I love you bringing up the idea of one-on-one meetings, partially because it's something I am really focused on with my clients, that they do that, because so many leaders say, oh, I don't have time to have weekly or bi-weekly one-on-one meetings. And frankly, even when they do it, they just go through a laundry list of holding the person accountable for a bunch of stuff. It's not a real conversation, but I think, in my mind, I go back to your answer to my first question about what the characteristic of a great leadership team, and you said openness. And having these regular one-on-one meetings and making them true conversations, not just, did you do this? Did you do this? That seems to me to be a way to create that open relationship, to give a person a chance, not just to slow down the timeline or take fluff out of the timeline of a project, but give a person a chance to say no. And I think that's what a lot of high performing folks don't do or don't know how to do or are afraid to do, is to say, I know you want me to do these 5 things. I can get 3 of them done. Which are the most important? Because I need to say no to 2 of them. So help me decide what the most important was, as opposed to, okay, I'll get all 5 done. And then they go home and they're thinking, how the heck am I going to get that stuff done?
Yeah. And then they'll do it and you'll think, that person's great.
Yeah, aren't they amazing?
Mm-hmm. That's I often call that the leadership constriction trap. As high performers, we often fall into that because as we evolve and we get promoted, we take on more responsibility and we keep saying yes, 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 yes. And then we become constricted. It's this trap, right? Where we've just taken on all this responsibility and all this stress. So, I love that, what you've said. If for me to say yes to this, I need to say no to whatever that is. And those alignment check-ins, like that clarity is key. And I'll often work, especially with female leaders when I work with them. They'll say, Shauna, things are unmanageable for me right now. Like I have so many things going on. There's too many priorities. I can't keep up. I should be able to keep up. And they'll tell themselves that story, and worry about it. I said, let's get everything onto paper. Let's get some data behind it, some metrics behind what you're doing. Let's look at what needs to be prioritized and what your capacity actually is. And oftentimes when we do that mapping, you'll find things like, there's an extra 30 hours of work that week that's needed. Where is that going to come from an already 50-hour work week? But what we have there is we have data. And when we have data, we can build a case and we can effectively advocate for ourselves. So we can say things like, look, this is the reality of the situation. Hey, leader or CEO or whatever, here's the reality of the situation. What do I need to prioritize? And as a result, I'll need to deprioritize this. What's our plan of action to be able to either be okay with this and floor it for now, or to reshuffle it somewhere else? And what's our plan long term to make sure that all of this work can get done if it's all important? So we can start to have really open, fruitful resource decisions, as opposed to those high performers stuck in that, leadership constriction trap, feeling like they're having to figure it all out themselves.
So shifting from, if I'm a leader, what do I need to do with and for, my team to handle this? Let's say I am a senior leader, and I'll go even further. Let's say I'm the CEO. So it all comes down to me, and I am feeling anxiety and I'm not sleeping, and all of a sudden my optimism is gone and I don't think things are going to work out and there's no way out, and it all comes down to me. What am I going to do? So if I'm a leader and I'm feeling that way, and obviously if I'm feeling that way, even if I try to hide it, that's going to start infecting my team. And I don't know if I like that word, but I'll use it. It's going to start infecting my team. If I'm a leader and, I can't go up to who I'm reporting to because it's me, what do I do as a leader to get to try to work myself out of that burnout situation?
Yeah. I love that you've asked this question, because that is the reality for a lot of senior leaders, right? And, they often don't have the spaces to say that out loud to anyone, so I think it's important they can hear this conversation. And if that resonates, I would say the first thing to do is to build a support system. And not on about your senior leadership team or your executive team. I'm on about a support system for you. Whether that is a coach, a mentor, a business advisor, a therapist, it could be a breathwork facilitator, right? But like whatever that is, what is your support system? Those trusted advisors that can support you from a mental, physical, and emotional level and perspective, right? So thinking about all of those lenses, who are those experts that you can bring in and pay oftentimes to have as your support system? So I always say strong leaders need strong support systems. So what does that look like right now, and where are some of those gaps? And I think that's really key. From that foundation, you're not going to be able to think your way into clarity if you're that dysregulated. It can be hard to see things clearly. It can be hard to make decisions when you're in those states of chronic stress. So it really is about, how do I learn how to regulate my system? And we can't really think our way into regulation, right? Like we have to kind of practice our way into that. Whether it's through breath work or physical activity, or been able to decompress, coming out of that fight or flight mode, right? So that's where the nervous system work really comes in. And what is it that can anchor us? Going back to basics: sleep, nutrition, water intake. What are your coping mechanisms? Are they healthy? Or are you reaching for a beer at the end of the day, right? No judgment, but like, how can you find those healthier coping mechanisms? From that place, then you can start to think about, okay, now I feel regulated in myself. I feel a bit better. I know things have to change. I haven't solved everything, but I'm clearer and I'm more grounded and centered. And from there, I can start to have conversations with my coach, my mentor, my business advisors, whatever that is, to start to understand what's my zone of genius and what do I need to hand off or create around me so that I can spend my time there in a realistic way and build out that strategy. And, hopefully there's some immediate wins and immediate things you can hand over. And then there's probably going to be a plan of action there of, okay, I'm focused primarily on X and Y and Z needs to be delegated, right? And we don't have that person in place. So that becomes your priority. But I think the most important thing is to not isolate yourself in that. Reach out. Reach out to someone. You're not alone in it, and it's often the weight. It feels heavier when we carry it alone. And it's probably not something you feel maybe comfortable sharing with your executive team or your senior leaders, because you want to be something for them, and that level of vulnerability can feel quite raw still. I know those feelings, so who can you place around you that you trust, that you can lean on, and that can support you in remembering who you really are?
So for the individual listening, leader, non-leader, this point doesn't matter. Whoever, if there's someone listening that is in the midst of it. They are feeling burnout. And, I don't know where burnout ends and depression begins or if they kind of overlap, but, some of us have been there where it could wind up with this feeling of overwhelm where something as little as, oh my God, I have to do the laundry now. On top of everything else I've got to go empty the dish. Like the littlest things could feel so overwhelming if people are at that stage. They're burnt out, they're overwhelmed. Shauna, you brought up a whole bunch of great strategies there. But what's one thing, for someone listening now that's feeling that way and they are overwhelmed? So going out and taking, 12 different steps to fix it is something that sounds crazy to them. They're not going to go do it. What's the first thing? What's something they can do when they're done listening to this, or they could stop right now and put us on pause and do it? What's one thing someone could do to just take a first step?
Breathe. Do it right now, right? Like feel your body wherever you are, whether you're sitting, whether you're standing, whether you're walking. Feel your body, feel your feet on the floor. Exhale and breathe. Breathe in through the nose. Really elongate that inhale, hold at the top, and really let that exhale go with a sigh. Yeah. And just breathe. The breath, and this is why I'm a breathwork facilitator, because the breath is, I believe, one of our fastest ways to a state of regulation. And, the breath has supported me so much down through the years. I found it because I came out of a really bad car accident and I had really bad PTSD and I couldn't get out of that fear that I was in from that accident. And it was the breath, learning how to breathe deeply, how to regulate using your breath, that actually really shifted everything for me. And it still does to this day, right? Like it's always there. It's our own medicine that we can access at any time. We can do it in a meeting, Mike. We can do it right now while we're listening to this podcast. We can do it when we're driving. What would it take for you to take 4, 5, 6 deep breaths? And notice then how you feel. And, those are in those micro moments, but to build that relationship with your breath is so powerful. There's lots of different methodologies and tools like conscious connected breath work, Wim Hof method. There's so many things out there, but they're all saying the same thing. The breath is a powerful way for you to come back to your center. So that's the first thing I would recommend, is to really connect with the breath, because oftentimes it can feel, when we're at that level of stress, it can feel difficult to do things like a meditation because the mind is just go, 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 go. I've been there myself. And that's why the breath is an active participation. So there's a movement to it. So sit on the ground, lie on the ground, connect to your breath, put on some music and just allow yourself to be for a moment, and sometimes that can bring uncomfortable feelings up as well. It's not all easy, right? Like oftentimes it's like, it feels hard to pause. It feels unsafe to slow down. So there's often reminders that we might need, as we start to kind of slow ourselves down. And the big thing is, I always say, collect your own data. Like I collected my own data at before I went for my quarterly break last week, where I took that day offline. My physical energy, my emotional state, and my spiritual connection. And, they were scoring okay before the day off. And then after, when I came home, I redid it and it was all 90, 100%. It was a massive shift. So collect your own data is what I'll say. Don't just listen to me as someone, sharing you should do this and you should do that. Everyone is different. Learn more about yourself, collect your own data as to what actually works for you. And that's really where that masterfulness comes in and being able to manage stress.
Shauna, as we start to kind of wrap up the conversation, tell me a little bit about who your clients are. Are you working with leaders to create cultures to prevent or deal with some of this? Are you working with individuals who are feeling some of this? Who are your clients and what kinds of work do you do with them?
Yeah, great question. So there's two kind of main programs that I offer. So the first one is for growth orientated women in leadership positions. And that program that I have is called the Impact Amplification Program. So that's for women that, want to grow, want to get to the next stage of their leadership, but know that things have to change in order for them to get there. Maybe it's their confidence, maybe it's their skills, maybe it's their executive presence. They want to, become the best version of themselves as leaders and really take their team and their organization to the next level. And that program is, a combination of all the things I needed, Mike, when I was, working my way up as a leader. So there's, I'm an executive coach, there's mentoring, there's group and community, there's, self-serve trainings and leadership development tools and frameworks. We do things like our annual in-person retreat where we bring female leaders together in person in the program, and we do meditations and breath work and saunas, and we plan our vision for the year. And it's just a really not just nourishing but thriving environment and community, and I'm really grateful for that. And we're constantly building out. We see things like a 95% retention rate for female leaders that are in the program, so they'll stay with their companies. We see on average a 40% reduction in burnout within female leaders in 90 days of joining the program. And we see an 85% promotion rate for female leaders within 18 months of joining the program. So even if there's any CEOs out there that are listening to this that have high performing female leaders, invest in them, sponsor them to be in a container like this, and the results will pay off tenfold. So that's one piece of the work I do. And the other piece of work I do, Mike, then is working with growth stage, small to medium sized businesses. And that really is more on that strategic consulting, really supporting them in being able to achieve that next level of growth with their people strategy and their leadership strategy locked in. And again, bringing in all the work I've done over the years, the coaching, the advising, mentorship, the systemic team coaching, all of those things are in there. But ultimately, it's working with those companies to get to the next stage and often unburden that executive team so that they can focus on their zone of genius.
Beautiful. And if someone wants to find out more about you and all those services, where's the best place for them to go?
You can head to my website, www.shaunamoran.com, and you can email our team. It's info@shaunamoran.com.
And by the way, Moran is Moran.
Yes, correct.
So I had to make sure I pronounced it right before we started, but I want to make sure people know how to spell it.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. My Irish accent always give me a hard time with the letter, as I pronounce it, or. But, you guys pronounce it R. So.
And I'm sure we do it wrong, but that's okay. Well, Shauna, this was fantastic. Thanks so much. Super helpful to leaders out there who want to make sure they are building the right culture for their teams, or they're dealing with some of these stresses themselves. I always say, if you want a great company, you need a great leadership team. Shauna, thanks for helping us get there today.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. Thanks for holding space for these amazing conversations and for asking such great questions. Really appreciate the meaningful conversation.
Great having you on.